Hello, good afternoon. I'm Mary Kay Devine, Director of Community Initiatives at Women Employed. I'm joined today by Carrie Thomas, the Associate Director of the Chicago Jobs Council, and my colleague Chris Warden. It is our pleasure to welcome you to today's meeting of the Pathway to Careers Network. And before we dive into the meeting agenda, I'm going to ask Chris to review some webinar housekeeping items with all of you.
Hi. During the presentation today, your phone lines will be muted. We've got a full agenda, so we have to ask that you hold your questions until after the presentation. But the chat window on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen will be open throughout, so you can type in questions to the chat window anytime during the presentation. And you can continue to use the chat feature after the presentations, but you can also use the button on the top left corner of your screen to raise your hand so that you may ask a question over the phone. You'll have 3 opportunities today to share your feedback through polling questions. And at the end of the session, we have a survey that will pop up on your screen, and we ask you to take 2 minutes to provide feedback so that we can use that information to plan future webinars. As you heard when you entered, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to that recording so that you can access it after today. And if you need technical assistance, we encourage you to contact ReadyTalk, our webinar service provider, at 1-800-843-9166.
Thank you, Chris. So we know that we have an urgent need to improve adult transitions into college and careers, and we start every one of these webinars to set the context and to remind folks of the current state of Illinois. Illinois has an urgent need to improve adult transitions into college and careers. And let me take a few moments before we jump into today's conversation to tell you about our initiative, the Pathways to Careers Network. By the year 2020, it's projected that 67% of Illinois jobs will require a college degree or certificate, and yet 3 million Illinois adults do not have an education credential beyond high school. As a result of this skills gap, it's projected that out of 100 future jobs, 24 could go unfilled. To address the skills gap, Women Employed and the Chicago Jobs Council launched the Pathways to Careers Network. It's an initiative to increase college and career success for adult learners with low basic skills. The Pathways to Careers Network advances the missions of both of our organizations. For nearly 40 years, Women Employed has been mobilizing people and organizations to expand educational and employment opportunities for America's working women. And for 30 years, the Chicago Jobs Council has worked with its members to ensure access to employment and career advancement opportunities for people living in poverty. I'm going to ask folks on the line to just confirm your membership with the Pathways to Careers Network. If you think that you're probably already on the list, just check that box. And if you're new to the network or new to the webinars, you can just select Sign Me Up Today, and you'll be added to our communication list. All right. If you haven't responded, please take a minute. Great. Thanks. We're going to move on.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Carrie Thomas from the Chicago Jobs Council. Today's webinar is the second Pathways to Careers webinar based on the recently released guide from the Illinois Community College Board. The guide, Creating a Successful Bridge Program, a how-to guide, draws extensively on 2 other guides that have been developed in the past, the 2005 Bridge Guide from Women Employed and the 2010 Guide from Instituto del Progreso Latino. This guide updates those with the experiences from the Shifting Gears initiative. Each chapter is designed to focus on a critical component in program development and includes local best practice examples and relevant worksheets. Links to the guide and the worksheets are found at the bottom of this slide. In each webinar on the guide, we are doing a deep dive into 1 or 2 chapters and featuring an experienced program provider with opportunities to ask questions. In September, we discussed chapters 1, 2, and 3. We featured programs discussing how they approached choosing a career cluster for their bridge program, chapter 2, and how they recruited the right students to their bridge program, chapter 3. That webinar is now archived on YouTube, and the link is shown at the bottom of this slide. Based on all of the input we've gotten during the webinars through surveys and polls, it informed our future content. And funding, of course, is the #1 topic that people want to hear about. So we're moving directly to Chapter 8, Leveraging Resources, Funding Bridge Programs. Today we're going to cover 3 key steps to find resources to support bridge programs that are outlined in Chapter 8. First, determining the cost of both developing and delivering a program. Second, because there is no dedicated funding sources for bridge strategies, researching, identifying the sources of funds that can support each component of a program. And then finally, leveraging and seamlessly using different funds and resources that you've identified. I'm now going to turn it over to Mary Kay, who will discuss the first step.
Thank you, Carrie. The first step in preparing a funding plan is to develop preliminary cost estimates for the key elements of the bridge program and to identify funds for these elements. The list on this slide represents anticipated startup costs that programs can anticipate incurring at the beginning of your bridge program development. In this early stage, partners should determine who takes the lead for which services that will be delivered and who will be financially responsible for funding the various bridge program elements. This slide is figure 16 from the Bridge Guide, page 81. We covered on the last slide the startup costs, so on this slide we're just focusing on the ongoing costs. Now, these are costs that programs can expect to incur over time once you've developed your bridge program. Now, the list of costs might look different to various programs or depending on the partnerships that are developed. Regardless of what your list looks like, it is important that all programs first determine what resources and services are available in-house, those services that don't require fundraising for new funds, and then also determining the service and the funding gaps. So you look at this list and you figure out what is currently available in-house, quote-unquote, no cost, no new cost, and then what are the services and funding gaps to identify. If partners identify available resources that don't require new funding, it is key to capture these monies in your budget to track the actual complete cost of the program, because you need to be able to represent future planning as well as future fundraising if anything changes with your resources. The worksheet that you see here on this slide is worksheet number 8, page 83. This is an example of one of the Save and Send worksheets that's available in the guide. And when we send out our follow-up email with an archive to the webinar and the slides, we'll make sure that the links to the Save and Send worksheets are included. This is a perfect tool, though, especially if you're working across organizations, that one team can start it, save it, send it on, and have your various team members review it. As you can see, it's a small image, so I'll just walk you through how it's organized. Fundamentally, this worksheet organizes your costs and your activities. Along the left-hand side, you'll have a list of startup costs and ongoing. Those were the 2 last slides we just covered. And then the field across the top will organize by activity the costs, the resources, the services, funding gaps, and funding sources that the different partners are responsible. Once your team explores the full range of resources, then you can revisit how to allocate the partner's existing and potential resources. Once you do that, then you can decide what new resources you need to seek and who should take the lead on seeking those resources.
So now you have a plan. You know exactly the kinds of how much you're going to need for each component, the kinds of resources you might have, and you're going to have identified the gaps. Everyone is going to find that there's gaps in funding to fully funding everything that needs to happen. So the next step is to look beyond what you know and what you have and research new sources that might be able to fill some of those gaps. This may include public funding streams, state or federal, that can support one or more of the activities that are part of your program. There may be competitive grant opportunities for public funds, or you may need to explore whether the public entity that gets these funds has any discretion to reallocate some portion for new initiatives. Private resources from entities that are committed to building a high-skilled workforce should also be explored. These may include philanthropic foundations, funding organizations like the United Way, or direct contributions or in-kind support from employers, or partnerships with organizations that have resources like unions. The guide on page 84 provides a tool for exploring new resources. It's very difficult on the slide to see the detailed information, but I'm going to walk through a little bit here. This is actually a checklist of all the possible funding sources, state and federal, and it's organized by each of the bridge program components. So the first section is program development and delivery, including customizing curriculum. The second is the funding sources that will support career development activities. And then finally, funding sources that could support transition services and support services. While the checklist does not guarantee that each funding source is available, it does allow you to hone in on which funding to explore given the gaps that you've identified in your plan. In addition to this checklist, the guide provides more detailed information about some of the funding streams, and it also highlights the fact that Illinois has revised its state policies regarding the use of 3 funding streams: adult education, Perkins, and the Workforce Investment Act, and the new policies are intended to make it easier to use those existing funds for different components of bridge programs. So finally, after you've researched new funding sources and you have your funding plan, every program is going to be in the situation of balancing multiple types of funding, both new and existing. So you're going to want to, as you're looking at existing funding to see if it can support any bridge program activities, you really want to be asking questions very creatively. So can your school's counseling department work with you to support the unique needs of bridge program students? Is there another division in your organization that delivers WIA employment services? Can bridge students receive career development services there? Would they be eligible? Would they be able to be enrolled in that WIA program? You're also going to have to recognize that bridge program activities are often an allowable activity for expenditure of public funds. That does not mean they're required or that they always happen, but you'll need to get to know the allocation of process for different public funding streams. So is there a competitive grant process? If so, would your organization be eligible, or would one of your partners be eligible to apply? Maybe one of your partners is already a recipient, and you can explore together how to use those existing funds to support the program that you're developing together. Lastly, as you consider private resources, remember that it's rare for private foundations to fund multi-year ongoing sustainable grants. So you'll want to think about those resources for things like program development or partner development or other one-time costs. You'll also want to think creatively about private sector partners, especially employers, because in addition to any financial contribution that they may be able to give, they have extensive experience, equipment that they may be able to provide in kind. In addition, the time that they can devote to internship programs and work experience will really make very strong components of your program. So before we hear from the program experts about all of these funding issues, we'd like to hear from you. So we have a short poll. So what we want to know is, for you, for which component of developing a bridge program is it most difficult to secure resources? So here you just want to pick one answer. Great. We're getting a lot of people voting. We'll take another few seconds. Looks like almost everybody has voted. All right. Well, that might not be any surprise. Very strong result here on this call that the vast majority of you find that support services, transition services are the most difficult to find resources for. Great. I'm now going to turn it back over to Mary Kay, and she'll introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Carrie. It is my pleasure to introduce today's first presenter, Michelle Rafferty, who is the Director of Research and Development at SARE Metro Detroit and Central States. Michelle will share with us how the SARE and Daly College, one of the city colleges of Chicago, how their partnership has figured out how to leverage multiple funding streams, including federal, state, and private dollars, in order to support their bridge program. Thanks for being with us today, Michelle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I want to make sure I'm unmuted correctly.
Yep, you're unmuted. We can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Well, I was asked to put together some slides that really gave everyone a very detailed picture of how Central State SARE Jobs for Progress has funded its bridge program. So the next few slides are going to be heavy in detail and lots of text. They're not really pretty, but I will walk you through some of the details here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with SARE, we're a community-based organization that's been providing employment and training services in the Chicagoland area for 25 years. We operate 2 one-stops, and we have a main location in Little Village that has included operating a healthcare bridge program that's been in development since 2005 and has been serving students since 2007. And our bridge program is a partnership between SARE and Daly College in Chicago, and then recently we've been working with Triton College for a program for our expansion out in the suburbs. This next slide here is a picture of the career pathways that we have been exploring, but to date, I'd say like 98% of our students have been focused on and moving through the nursing pathway. But this is a program plan that we developed in partnership with city colleges in 2010 of the other possibilities that we want to explore in bridge programs if we were able to secure funding. We did recently get a grant to develop a bridge program in the dental field in the suburban area, but right now our students, the ones that we are serving, primarily start at the healthcare bridge level, the one that's between the 6.0 and 8.9 grade levels, and they move on to the CNA training, and then some of them move on to the advanced bridge, LPN, RN bridge that moves into LPN and RN programs. So we, as I mentioned earlier, planning started in 2005. And we first got a demonstration grant from ICCB. It was a smaller grant. And we used the funds to develop a contextualized basic skills curriculum. And we also used the funds, the person we hired to develop the curriculum also taught the first 2 cohorts of students. And at that time, what we did was we had our one stop in Chicago, and we co-enrolled students so they could use WIA individual training accounts through our one stop to pay for the occupational training tuition. After this demonstration, Daly and SARE decided to shift the instruction completely to Daly. So Daly then at that point became responsible for hiring the instructor and also in using their funding sources, adult basic education funds and other resources to pay for the bridge instruction. And then back then we had this curriculum that we developed. We basically gave that curriculum to Daly and then also had some input in hiring the instructor. When we started to develop the program, the first break that we got was a sizable grant from the Partnership for New Communities through their Opportunity Chicago initiative. And that grant was large enough to allow us to expand and serve over 100 CHA residents. And we used this grant to hire a program manager, 2 career development specialists. We used it to pay for operating costs, for a subsidized internship, and then the supportive services such as bus passes and some other work support. In terms of the tuition for the occupational training, for those of you who aren't from Chicago, there's an intergovernmental agreement between City Colleges of Chicago and the Chicago Housing Authority that pays for tuition for CHA residents. There's some stipulations in terms of what it will and won't pay for, but in our case, we were able to use that agreement to cover the cost of the tuition. And years after the initial launch of the program, we did receive additional funding, secured additional funding to expand the program. I'd say most significantly, in 2009, we applied for and got a WIA contract for a bridge program, and this contract was specifically for bridge programs. So through that, we were able to pay for any staff costs related to the bridge program. Plus, we were also able to access those individual training accounts that are really key to be able to have a full program that bridges students into the occupational training. So we have had that grant since 2009, and we use it for staff operating costs and supportive services. And then the the resources for the tuition is managed by a third party in Chicago. We then also got a grant through the DCEO's Training for Tomorrow initiative, which was a kind of a one-time deal. It was a governor initiative in 2010, and the funding was for 2 years, and it allowed us to hire some more staff and to serve more students, basically, to supplement our program that we have in partnership with Daly. Then we also got a grant from the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, but it's through the Workforce Board of Metropolitan Chicago. There was a grant opportunity that they applied for and then turned around and subcontracted with several providers in the region to deliver bridge programs. So we received funding to do this for Cook County, for suburban Cook County, and which we already had a one-stop there in Cicero and some other services. So we used the funding to expand to suburban Cook County, developed our partnership with Triton, and started to serve suburban students. And that's a 5-year grant, which is really nice and rare. Currently, we have a total annual budget of close to $500,000, and we use that funding primarily for staffing and supportive services. So we have still have a manager of healthcare programs. We have 2 career development specialists. We have an industry staffing specialist, which is fancy for job developer. We have an MIS specialist that helps with data and intake, who's part-time. We have a contractual part-time bridge instructor for the suburban project, because in the suburban area, our partnership is not like that with Daly, where Daly is doing the teaching the bridge. We actually teach the bridge ourselves, and then Triton just provides the occupational training. And then we use the funding also for all of our operating costs. And SARE uses a cost allocation plan, so each of our grants covers a portion of our facility costs, utilities, all those little boring details that you need to keep a program running. And then we also use it for supportive services, our bus passes and background checks and different work support. The occupational training is paid by either the ITA accounts through our own contract, and then we also still do dual enrollment with our one-stop, and primarily in Cicero for the suburban project I mentioned. And then Daly continues to provide all the funding, management, and space for the bridge instruction, and Triton provides us with space for free, which is really nice, for the bridge program in the suburbs. In terms of how we make this work, I'd say that SARE and Daly operate pretty independently, and I see that Jean Johnson's on the call, Dean Johnson, so maybe she can speak to some of these details during the Q&A portion. SARE is responsible for obtaining funding for all the wraparound services. So we're always looking for additional funding opportunities to pay for the recruitment. We do the orientation, intake, and assessment. We do all the one-on-one career coaching and career planning. We do all the case management. We help students with, applying for all the supports that they need in those transitional services. We also do all the job and internship placement and career development training. And then Sarah also operates the Center for Working Families in the city of Chicago that provides financial literacy and coaching and income support screening. And then Daily College basically is responsible for funding the bridge training. And they also apply independently for additional support. They currently are the recipient of an Accelerating Opportunity grant through a consortium of foundations. In addition, we do operate independently, but we also talk all the time. So we're communicating on a very routine basis to make sure that we're aware of each other's needs and goals, grants, what's going on. We plan for a bridge start date, so we'll talk routinely about the fact that we have to do maybe start 2 bridges in the next 6 months, and so we'll be in communication about when that bridge should start, and then of course when the CNA should. Trying to plan that bridge around Daily CNA training schedule, and then whenever Sarah applies for funding, Daily will provide a letter of support for that. But that's about as other than that, we're pretty independent. The students, I think, largely experience this in a pretty seamless way. They are recruited by Sarah. We're the ones who form that initial relationship. They are assigned to a career development specialist who really helps guide them through this whole process. But then they also receive a lot of support from Daily beyond just the instruction. The department there is really, really helpful to students and really tries to make sure that they're aware of next steps, just as Sarah is. I think that, of course there's hiccups along the way, but for the most part we work together, and we've been doing this so long now that it's pretty, we don't have a lot of issues. I think for the student it feels like a pretty organized program. I like to think so, at least. In terms of funding challenges, I think it's always important to be honest about that. So a lot of these grants are time limited. So even if you do a great job, and this I think is the hardest part, and everyone I know on the call is aware of this problem, you could do a great job, have a lot of success, but the funding source you have, it was a one-time deal, or maybe it was the initiative ended. So there's always a constant need to seek out new funding sources. And then for us, getting awarded the WIA contract was huge because that is, obviously part of a federal line item, and at least for the near future. But even with that funding source, we've had difficulties because it's been reduced over the last few years due to cuts at the federal level. So with those changes and fluctuations, it's very difficult to maintain a consistent staffing structure, which, as you can imagine, brings with it challenges in terms of managing the program, having the kind of consistency you really want for students starting out. You might have to, hire staff 1 year, and then the next year you don't have funding for, 3 career development specialists, and you have to lay someone off. That's very, very difficult. And then for special, supplemental features like the paid internship, we have that through the Partnership for New Communities, and since that grant ended, we haven't been able to pay for the internship, which impacts its popularity. So we still try to offer that, but it's more on a voluntary basis. It'd be great to be able to offer that and all the things you want to, but you have to kind of make cuts somewhere. And so a lot of times those special features are the ones that get cut. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Michelle, very much. I know a few folks have asked questions or sent us some chat comments throughout. Definitely, we will share your slides. We will share the slides to the presentation as well as the audio recording in a follow-up email to today's presentation. Before we move on to Valerie Harris, I want to take a few minutes. We've got plenty of time for questions. You can submit a question via chat, so you could type your question into the chat window, or you can raise your hand. And if you raise your hand and you want to ask a question live on the phone line, then I'll give you instructions how to unmute your lines. We had one question come in from Sherry Burlingame, and she had asked about Perkins, commenting that it has a very specific required use of funds and allowable use of funds. Sherry asked which of these apply to the development of bridge programs. So the immediate answer that we can share that comes from the guide, there's obviously a longer explanation on page 85 in the section that goes through the specific funding streams, and in the figure 17 that Carrie hit on page 84, if you take a close look at that, it walks you through the type of bridge activities and then the various funding streams that support them. I would also bounce back to either our presenters or other folks on the line that have experience with Perkins to see if anyone has additional details that they would want to share, because it definitely looks in the bridge guide for bridge program development and delivery, identifying sector and employer skills, developing and managing partnerships, providing professional development. You know, it looks like many of the startup activities are checked for Perkins. So Brian Durham is on the line, and Brian, I might just ask you to unmute your line. You can hit *7, and then when you're finished commenting, just push *6 and you'll go back on mute.
Mary Kay, can you hear me?
Yep.
That was a little too technically challenging for me there, so I was trying to comply with the chat.
You persevered.
Yeah, you know, I would just recommend that as you go down that path that you have a conversation with us. I think the guide does a good job of laying out some of the areas, but also consider that you have a plan that you submit for Perkins, and we would want to capture that through your existing activities, or else talk with you about how to strategize using the various funding sources that we provide, which would include Perkins, PIG grants, leadership grants, and all those sorts of things, to help with this in implementing bridge programs. Because there are some things, for example, that we might point you to the Program Improvement Grant, which comes in tandem with Perkins, but has a little more flexibility. So I think it's always good to follow up with myself or Rob Kerr here at the agency if you have any questions and you have any doubts about how to use the funds.
Thank you, Brian. We'll just ask you to go back on mute, *6, but if someone has a follow-up, Brian, you can raise your hand or you can send a chat. In the meantime, Lynn Berkut sent a chat question. Great information. Thank you, Lynn. Her question is, we noticed your students, this is for Michelle, we noticed your students begin the pathway at a pretty low reading level. How much intensive reading instruction is necessary for them to be able to succeed through the pathway?
I actually just was typing out an answer to that. What I was explaining is that the students, even though our pathway shows students starting at a 4th grade level, we've had a few cohorts come in at that level, but most come in between the 6th and 9th grade level. And our bridge instruction is 8 weeks in length, and it's pretty much full-time. It's 30 hours per week that they spend in reading, math, and writing instruction. In terms of more detail on how much is spent in reading instruction, that would be a question more for Daly College. And I don't want to put Dean Johnson on the spot, but or maybe that's a better question offline since we're focusing more on funding right now. That's up to you.
And let me just ask before I go to our next question that was submitted by chat, if Jean Johnson does have anything to add, you can unmute your line on *7, and then we would just ask you to go back on mute at *6. And if not, as Michelle said, we will definitely make sure to connect folks on offline conversations.
I am online.
Hi, Jean.
Hi. I'm wiping the chair because it was such an admirable thing between Michelle and I just can't handle all that lovely speech. The grade level or the amount of time spent on each individual area is what was the question on that was posed.
Yep. The question was about how much intensive reading instruction is necessary for the students to succeed transitioning along the pathway?
There are many unique objects that we've done with the bridge. We've made it hybrid and a community learning. So because it is a cohort-based, the students are set together and learn together. And again, we are using hybrid both with the instructor-led and with computer-based training. So that having that computer-based training, the students are also fully aware that they can be doing this. You know, they're motivated enough that they put in additional hours over and above the hours in the classroom to continue that extensive training, so that we can get them up to the goals that they need to get into the programs.
Thank you, Jean. We'll ask that you go back on mute at *6, and I'm going to take one last question from Mary Charouz at College of Lake County, and then I'll introduce our next speaker. So Mary asks a question for Michelle. As you coordinate the multiple federal and state funds, how do you avoid supplanting funds?
I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute, not dash the question. Am I back on?
Yep, you're back on. We can hear you. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good question. I like to think of it more as, honestly, the funding that we receive is not sufficient to fully serve the number of students we want to serve every year, especially with the decreases in funding we've had from our WIA contract. So, like when we get additional funding, like say we have the WIA grant and we received the U.S. Health and Human Services grant, we didn't then just serve the same number of students and use the funding for other types of operating costs, or basically we serve more students. We use that grant to expand our program to the suburbs. So just in terms of like when we're planning every year about how many students we're going to serve, we're always very aware of the funding levels that we have and what the preferences of the funding sources are. Like in terms of, first of all, of course, like do they allow you to dual enroll? We're always very transparent with our funding sources about, this is what we do. We like to use, the one-stop contract for ITA funding, or we want to use this smaller grant to supplement our existing program that just was cut. So I think transparency is number one. You have to be honest, and ask the funding source and explain what you're thinking about doing, and then also be ethical about it. Just think about, what kind of funding you have each year, and then what the grant will or will not allow you to do. But then also you don't want to overpromise and say you're going to serve X number of new students when your other grant's being cut, and that there's no way to really do that. Does that answer the question?
We hope so.
Okay.
If not, Mary, please send a follow-up chat, Mary, if there's a part 2 of your question, and we can either follow up at the end of the webinar or offline. But I want to move now to introduce our second presenter today, Valerie Harris, the Associate Dean of Adult Education at Lewis and Clark Community College. We really appreciate Val taking time today to discuss how Lewis and Clark gets creative using existing funds to support bridge programs while also monitoring new funding opportunities. And I'll pass the mic over to Val.
Thanks, Mary Kay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm assuming you can hear me okay.
We sure can, Val. Yep, you're loud and clear.
Thank you. You and Michelle have taken us all through some great detail and process steps. I hope that what I have to say can give people some more ideas at their local programs. In fiscal year 2007 is when we began our first serious attempt at bridge programming, when we applied for and were selected as one of the 13 bridge programs in the Joyce Foundation-sponsored Shifting Gears Initiative. And we have had to find funds to support these wonderful programs ever since. But it's fun, right? It's a puzzle. Let's see. There we go. So I'm learning to do these tools and talk at the same time. Assessing yourself is really key. We look in every institutional and external nook and cranny for resources to support bridge programs. Even 6 years ago, when with Shifting Gears funding, we relied heavily on those who went before us. We used the 2005 Women Employed Guide to help guide our development. And now there are so many more resources available, that I would just encourage people to look for development resources and curriculum resources. We have Bevan's Southern Illinois Professional Development Center in charge of transitions now, and there are just lots and lots of resources available that weren't available then. And we also have this national spotlight, through the Achieving the Dream and Complete College America, Accelerating Opportunity, that can, we can use those to give us a sense of urgency, and our partners and our funders, and just to elevate our cause. So it's a little bit different now than it was back then when we began. Back in the day when we began our bridge program, we assessed our strengths, and we built on leadership and relationships that we have here at the college. We invited a team. We called it our transition team. It included members from the Adult Education Administration, faculty, counseling. We had Lewis and Clark faculty from key content areas, math, physics, process operations technology, those areas to which our students were bridging. We had the Vice President of Academic Affairs, the Vice President of Enrollment, and pertinent deans. And this team was just really, really important. And it met monthly at first, and shifted to every other month, and then quarterly by the end of the 2 years. And in that time, we also utilized some smaller teams, one focused on developing contextualized curriculum and piloting the instruction, and the other focused on the program design around the instruction and recruitment, student supports. Those two smaller groups met more frequently and then reported back to our larger team. I just can't emphasize enough the value of these relationships. They have been key to our success for bridge programming ever since. Just an example. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm seeing you. Is that helping any?
Yep, much better, Val. Thank you.
Okay. It's really weird to be doing this for you people, my friends out there, because I'm just sitting here in my office and I can't hear myself at all, other than I sound regular. So, okay, back to what I was saying. An example of the relationships. Last year we were in a really tight funding situation and we're having trouble. We had some gaps in funding for bridge programs, and our Director of Student Development oversees a federal FIPSI grant, and since I knew that she understood bridge programming and that fit her requirements for FIPSI, I just asked if she had a funding that she could share with us, and she did. And you'll find that bridge programs have a lot of overlapping benefits for different parts of your institution and can sometimes fit into, other people's funding requirements. So that was just an example of how having those relationships, helped us meet a critical need last year. So after Shifting Gears, once our programs were developed and piloted, the Shifting Gears funding went away. So we had to determine how to continue. Now I have to say, at Lewis and Clark, we are aggressive grant writers, and we were able to receive some ICCB bridge development and implementation. We added a bridge to health sciences. But we also knew that we wanted to be able to keep bridge programs regardless of having to go out and receive these extra funding sources. We kind of use the Stephen Covey begin with the end in mind. Even at the beginning of our Shifting Gears project, I don't know if people remember, but Shifting Gears targeted both developmental and adult education. I mean, you had to pick one or the other at the time. But back then we knew that we wanted our bridge programs to serve both populations, and we thought that that would help us sustain the programs. So we created our bridge with multiple courses, a series of courses, or not a series, but multiple courses instead of one course, so that we could fund with multiple funding streams. And since developmental education students are in the courses, and as well as adult education students, they pay tuition. Therefore, we're able to justify our institution paying for part of the courses, and then adult education pays for the other part of the coursework. So that was one way that we, utilized our institutional funds. We also, a couple of years ago, we looked at our data, and we found that we had a GED class that we offered in the afternoons here on campus that wasn't really particularly effective. It didn't have great student attendance. We weren't getting great learning gains. And so we just made the decision to replace that. We just quit doing the traditional course in the afternoon, and that saved enough funds that we could, direct those to some bridge programs. So I just ask you to consider, what other populations can you serve that might bring additional funds, or do you have any current course offerings that you can replace to bring much-needed bridge courses to your program? And finally, I just like the word rigor, and I want to be able to say it, but no, I'm just kidding. Maintaining rigor is really important. I just encourage you to maintain the rigor of your bridge programs. They are different, and in our case, we want to use our bridge program to simulate college. Our students are enrolled in multiple courses. They get grades. They have books. They have to be in a simulated college environment. And I would encourage you to start small. This is a quality program, not a quantity type program. And if you can start small and have really successful outcomes, it's much easier to promote these programs, to your internal partners, to your external partners as well. So here at Lewis and Clark, we have come a long way. We still have much to do. And I thank you for listening, and I'm open to any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Val. Just like last time with Michelle, if people want to raise their hand, we can call on you, and you can unmute your phone line. If you want to submit something by chat, we can just read it out loud. I think, I just want to emphasize a few of the key points that I heard Val make while we're waiting for questions to come in. The importance of cultivating the key relationships up front. I know especially with programs on the line that might be brand new to Bridge. Val Harris talks about going back to 2007, 5 and 6 years ago, having this time to experience the model and test some things out. But, her point was that the faculty, the deans, the vice president, the leadership of the college across departments were engaged up front. And so I definitely encourage folks, either in a community-based organization model or a college model, to tap into your leadership early and often. I think the other point that I want to emphasize, I see a question just came in, two other key things, the data-driven decision-making and taking a look. We've started to hear, especially in this time of limited resources, how are you using your existing resources and then reallocating those existing resources. So if you can look at your course offerings, if there's attendance issues, completion issues, outcome questions, and you want to take advantage of that time slot and the availability of those instructors to test the Bridge model, we definitely encourage you to make data-driven decisions. And I think the last one, so I'm going to start with the first question for Val. Can you say any more? Because I think the conversation of blending populations has been one that has come up consistently, going back to shifting gears and through the years with the expansion of the policy and funding. You talk about using the adult education WIA Title II as well as the developmental education institutional funding. So is there anything else that you want to say to encourage folks or how you do this? because I feel like this is really going to be one of the ways that we advance this model, is moving beyond the silos, frankly addressing very similar populations and figuring out how we leverage or braid or use those combined resources. So I don't know, Val, if you have any other words of encouragement or details that you want to offer as far as blending populations.
Well, thanks, Mary Kay. It's a little complicated the way we do it here because we don't blend funds. I mean, that just sounds crazy when I say it out loud and hear myself say that, but the institutional funds support the developmental education students, and the adult education funds support the adult education students, and it's kind of complicated, and I'd be happy to answer specific questions if people have them. But we have two sets of courses that are being offered at the same time in the same room, so that the developmental education students are enrolled in developmental education, adult education students are enrolled in our approved courses. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. Can I ask one follow-up, and then I'm going to go to Danita's question. So it's almost what I hear is two populations, same class, same time. Correct. Clarifying question, same content and same instructor?
Yes. Yes.
And then as far as the funding, following the funding of the instructor, would it just depend on when the course is offered, that maybe for this module it's an adult ed instructor, for the next module it could be a dev ed instructor?
Right. For example, we have a Bridge to Health Sciences. This will help answer Danita's question too.
Thank you.
We have a reading course. They're all contextualized. They all use the health context. We have a reading, an English, a math, and a career development course. So adult education funds pay for career development and I'm trying to think here, reading. And the institutional, actually I think in this case adult education pays for CDEV, career development, reading, and English, and the college pays for the math course. The college institutional funds pay for the math course. And so does that help? And in some cases,
yeah, that clarifies it for me. I wonder if there's anybody else. We still have a couple minutes for Val before we close out today's presentation. Do other folks have follow-up questions, clarifying questions? You can raise your hand or send a chat.
The other answer to Danita's question is we're piloting a bridge to the CNA, and in that case we have a lower level, it's a lower reading level offering, and we have a reading, writing, there's a jobs and a college orientation course, and math. And institutional funds pay for half of those courses, and adult education pays for half of those courses. And that's how we do it.
Thank you, Val. In case folks didn't see the question come up in chat, Danita Carr, forgive me, I know I've met you, so I apologize for the pronunciation of your last name. Danita had asked Val what areas that Lewis and Clark offers bridge programs. So thank you, Val, for answering that. Okay, if there's no other questions, then we'll move on to closing out today's webinar and give you some opportunities to access this information and to connect with us in the future. I'm going to hand the mic back to my colleague, Carrie Thomas from CJC.
Okay, thanks, Mary Kay. So we have a final poll here. You've heard a lot about different funding streams. There's a lot of resources in the guide, and we'd like you to take a moment to respond to this poll on the screen. There are 8 different public funding streams listed. Please select the 3 that you would want to hear more information about. You can put them in any order, but please only select 3. So why don't we take a minute to complete this poll. So of the 8 funding streams, some of them are very familiar. We had Title I, We have Title II is adult education, but there's also other funding streams that are talked about in the guide, trade adjustment assistance, TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, the state-funded job training and economic development program. We know community development block grant is sometimes used for workforce services, so we're wondering which one you would like to learn more about. So select 3.
Oh, we're getting some feedback. You have to choose a rank or else it won't complete. Our apologies. We thought if we just used a ranking poll and had you choose your top 3. So here's our advice. Think really hard about your first 3 and then just answer the last 5. And we'll just leave this poll open for another minute, just trying to help us prioritize future content or follow-up responses. Okay, another suggestion. If anyone, we're seeing a few more chat comments. If anyone is still having trouble submitting a response, you could also just put in chat your top 3, and then we would at least have a record of it. We could just add it. So we'll leave this open for one more minute. If you cannot, if you're having any issues using the tool, the polling tool, then you could just shoot us a chat, and we'll make a note of it in our records. Your top 3 funding streams that you would like more information.
Great. I think we're going to, almost everybody's responded, so I think we're going to go ahead and close the poll. And we will be using these results to inform some future webinars. So finally, I would just like to say thank you again to everyone for your participation and your questions and your patience with respect to some of the technology. I also especially want to thank our presenter experts, Ms. Michelle Rafferty from SARE and Val Harris from Lewis and Clark Community College. Also thanks to my co-hosts Mary Kay Devine and Chris Warden, who's been keeping us abreast of all of your input and questions. Thanks for the poll and survey results. We'll be informing our next webinar, so be on the lookout for a notice of that webinar. We're looking at very early in 2013 to host that. And before you sign off, please complete the short survey to give us feedback on today's webinar. And thank you again, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Please stand by.